Good afternoon to you all. Very warm greetings from Sharm el-Sheikh to the audience online, and welcome to those in the audience here at the Climate Education Hub at COP27. Thank you all for joining us. It is a great pleasure and privilege to be here today with many great friends and colleagues in the room and online. It has already been a very educational and interesting morning here at the very first Education Hub at COP27. My name is Petra Minorop, and I'm Professor of International Law at Durham Law School, Durham University, and I also serve as the Director of the Durham Center for Sustainable Development, Law and Policy. Allow me to say just a few words about Durham University. Durham is not only famous for its university's research and education, we also have a castle from the late 11th century, and the building work was indeed started under William the Conqueror. Around the same time, building work for Durham Cathedral started, and both buildings are protected as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. They are well worth a visit, so if you haven't been to Durham yet, please come and visit us. Today, you will hear from some of the leading climate researchers at Durham University. I will introduce them shortly. You will also hear from some of our key collaborators, Dr. Niloufar Oran, the Director of the Center for International Law at the National University of Singapore, and from Danielle Yeo, and you will hear also from Amir Sokolovsky, the Director Global for Climate Change at CDP. So Niloufar and Danielle will both join us online in a few minutes. Now, the title of this event is Collaboration in Climate Research and Education. Collaboration is key in overcoming crisis, and we have seen that during the COVID-19 pandemic. And climate change makes no difference. Negotiations are taking place here at COP, a few pavilions away from this one. But I nevertheless hope that we can make a meaningful contribution to this year's COP. I hope the vision of this COP can be one of working together to implement all SDGs, led by this COP's work on SDG 13 and 7 in particular. Let's not waste more time. We cannot afford a COP without results. We need results that lead to action. It is time that we incorporate scientific evidence into targets and long-term transitioning plans and policies. We need all hands on deck. If there is political will to incorporate science into legal and policy frameworks, transformational change can take place. I will now introduce you to some of the work we are doing at the Durham Center for Sustainable Development, Law and Policy, before then introducing our speakers. I hope that this session can lead to new collaborations and partnerships. Now, at the Center for Sustainable Development, Law and Policy, we have a mission. We have the mission to implement the SDGs across intersecting thematic areas through interdisciplinary research. And we are doing this also for the benefit of countries we are working with, and I will say a few more words on that in a moment. Our motivation is to extend collaborative links within the university, but also beyond, to work with other academic partners, but also industry partners, other NGOs, and the wider society. We've got a few research projects underway, a few initiatives, and among those are some where we are working with developing countries to give them advice on how to incorporate science into their legal and policy frameworks. We also have a more educational-oriented lecture series, the Global Environmental Law Lecture Series, which is free to attend, and you can register online on our website. And you will see that there are a number of very exciting talks still coming up with leading justices from leading courts around the world. We had the Supreme Court of Nepal, India, East African Court. We have a number of speakers to give you a variety of insights and perspectives. Now, the objectives of this session, we've called them easy objectives, and this was something that we elaborated in my climate law and policy class with students, where we are looking into extending our collaborations with other institutions, sharing knowledge, and then exploring the possibility and options for new opportunities and partnerships, and also involving what we call climate learners and educators at all levels. And this very much pertains to our students as well, and I'm very proud that these slides have also been developed with a student, Manon Hirschbill, from my class, who is a year 3 student. So I think we need to do more to involve students in our education. Now, this is now our introductory slide for all speakers, and I'm taking great pleasure in introducing, first of all, Professor Chris Stokes, who is a physical geographer at Durham University, a leading researcher, a glaciologist. He's a great expert in modeling and explaining glacial retreat and the loss of ice sheets, and we will hear more about his research in a few moments. And this will then be followed by Dr. Niloufar Arwal. I already mentioned she is the director of the very prestigious Center for International Law at the National University of Singapore, who will come in with a prepared video clip. And this is then followed by Danielle Yeo, who is the lead for climate law and policy at the Center for International Law. Then we will hear from an expert in engineering, Professor Afrash Osman, who is professor in engineering at Durham University, and he will tell us about resilient infrastructure project. He's got great experience in working with multi-stakeholder projects across various countries. And then we hear from CDP, the Director Global for Climate Change, Armin Sokolovsky, a great friend and colleague who knows a lot about these climate negotiations and has a very deep knowledge of the international regime on climate change. And I'm looking forward to hearing all these different perspectives and insights in a moment now. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Stokes, and I'm just going to really give a little flavor of the interdisciplinary nature of both climate change research, but also undergraduate teaching, and also research postgraduate training in climate change as well. I'm just going to give you some very quick examples, both from my own research, and as I say, from some of the teaching and postgraduate research that we do. So I'm a glaciologist, and my research focuses on how glaciers are responding to climate change. And I do that at a range of timescales. So you can see in one of the photographs here, one of the things I'm interested in is how mountain glaciers are shrinking just over the last few years, the contribution that makes to sea level rise, but also what that means for water security, what that also means for hazards in these mountain environments as well. But I'm also interested on the bottom right panel there at how very large continental-sized ice sheets come and go in response to climate change. And of course, one of the most serious impacts of that will be on global mean sea level rise. And it's really interesting to think as a geographer that the impacts of changes in the cryosphere are felt at a range of scales. So glacier hazards at a local scale, water resources, water security obviously affects regions and then obviously sometimes crosses borders. And then of course global mean sea level rise, where any country in the world that has a coastline will be affected, and even those that don't might be indirectly affected by migration, etc. I just want to give you one example of some recent research we've done in the geography department at Durham. It was actually an international effort. We were collaborating with teams all over the world, but we were focusing in particular on the stability of the East Antarctic ice sheet, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner there. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but essentially this is the world's largest ice mass. It contains about 52 meters of sea level rise locked up in it. And what we were able to show through a series of analyses of numerical computer simulations of this ice sheet forced by different emissions pathways, a really clear dichotomy between low emission scenarios that stay below the Paris Agreement will protect this ice sheet. But if we were to exceed 2 degrees, in fact, if we were to exceed 1.8 degrees, we project in this paper that the East Antarctic ice sheet will contribute somewhere between 1 and 3 meters by 2300 and 2 and 5 meters by 2500. And this is the ice sheet at the moment that we think is most stable. So I think it's really important that actually, although we're focusing on East Antarctic here, we already know that Greenland is contributing to sea level rise and the western part of Antarctica is contributing to sea level rise as well. So this paper will be presented in a lot more detail tomorrow in the Cryosphere Pavilion. And one of the things it's enabled some of the scientists at Durham to do is connect in with the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative, which is a network of senior policy experts and researchers working with governments and organizations to create, shape and implement initiatives designed to preserve as much of the Earth's cryosphere as possible. So this is just one small example of some research that we're doing as part of this new center. We're trying to link in to take the science into policy, into maybe even law and sustainable development. And it requires that multidisciplinary approach, which I think is a theme that we're going to be focusing on a lot today. That one of the jobs, I think, of the Center for Sustainable Development and Policy is to take the science like this that's been done and translate it beyond just the scientific interest. Just want to give you another example of multidisciplinary climate education. So one of the things we've done at Durham recently is launched a new first-year undergraduate program called An Introduction to Climate Change. And it's just a module to give students a robust understanding of the science underpinning climate change and some of the mitigation and adaptation responses that we might choose to make. And it also, of course, meets some of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we were very purposeful here in ensuring that this module could be taken by any student across the university. So what you can see on the right-hand side here is a list of different degree programs of students that took this module, ranging from biology, sport and exercise, geology, geoscience, climate science, economics, criminology, anthropology, all represented on this degree program. And I'm very happy to talk to anybody here today about how we put this together. One of the nice things is that what we could do on the module, the word cloud there is show. We asked students how they felt at the start of the module, and you can see pessimistic there was one of the largest words, frustrated, concerned, challenged. But actually after the module, when we asked them, you know, how confident are you in your kind of understanding of and the response to climate change, that over 80% of students then felt confident that they could explain the options for how we can reduce climate change after they'd done this module. So this was just a very intentional effort on behalf of the university to lay on a module that's open to any student from the university. Another example that I'm involved in is a final year interdisciplinary module on the Arctic, which focuses on the policy response to climate change. And what we do here is some quite innovative assessment where we expose students to the operation of the Arctic Council. We teach them about some of the impacts of climate change in the Arctic, but also some of the role of both the nation states and organizations and non-governmental organizations in responding to those pressing changes that are taking place in the Arctic. And we do that through a mock Arctic Council exercise where students are encouraged to draft a declaration around which they seek consensus, around which they have to negotiate, they have to show diplomacy skills, they have to work, perhaps challenge other groups as well. And the idea is that in this mock Arctic Council, the students work together to come up with a draft declaration that they can all agree on. And the final assessment actually involves students writing an individual kind of policy memorandum to the leaders in their government to say, this is the action that we're proposing to take. These are the groups we think we've got on board. These are the groups we think we still have to work with. So it's just another example of how I think you need this multidisciplinary approach, merging together both the geopolitics, the science, etc. And some of that interdisciplinary focus on the Arctic at Durham also extends to a Leverhulme Trust funded doctoral training program where we're training up a cohort of 15 PhD students as part of an interdisciplinary understanding for a changing Arctic. And one of the new unique things about this program at Durham is that the students must be supervised by staff members from more than one department. So we're specifically looking and training students in interdisciplinary studies where they have to have maybe one supervisor from geography and one from politics and maybe one from history. And this so far has worked really well, and these students, I think, are actually, in being able to think across disciplines, are addressing some really interesting problems in the Arctic. So the other great thing about this is that they also get a paid placement at an Arctic organization, so they get practical work experience, and the first cohort of students are now graduating from this and going into some interesting next steps. So I think that's just a really small flavor of some of the things that I'm personally involved in, but I think that the new Centre for Sustainable Development Law and Policy will serve as almost as a hub through which these connections can be made. And I'm really looking forward over the next few years to making connections with other departments interested in climate science in the university, but also beyond the university as well, both in academia and also outside academia. So I shall finish there.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I press now again, and I think this should bring us now to Dr. Oral. Thank you.
Greetings from Singapore and from the Center for International Law at the National University of Singapore. I am really pleased to have this opportunity to contribute to the education hub for COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh, and thank my dear colleague and friend, Professor Petra Minarop, Director of the Durham Center for Sustainable Development Law and Policy, for this invitation. Now, first, just a little bit about the Center for International Law. We are a university-level research center dedicated to research and capacity building for international law in the region, the ASEAN region, the Asian region, and globally. We cover many topics, but included, we cover also climate change. Now, this hub is focusing on education. And as someone who is an educator herself, I taught for some 20 years at the law school at Istanbul Bilgi University. Education is absolutely key, and that includes climate change. We need to have strong, robust climate change education at all levels. It needs to be a core element. As we know, climate change at this point is an overarching, cross-cutting concern across the planet and across all issues. Now, before I began my position here as director of the Center for International Law, as I just said, I was actually a member of the law faculty in Turkey at the Istanbul Bilgi University. And after attending my first climate COP, which was in Copenhagen, I believe that's 2009, I realized the importance and the need for law students to know more about climate change and the international legal framework of climate change. And so at that time, I proposed such a class or such a course be included in our curriculum, and I'm pleased to say that the law school and the dean accepted this. And I believe I may have been one of the first, if not the first, in Turkey to include on the law school curricula a course on international climate change law. Now, this was at the master's level, but I believe that it was an important addition, and I like to think that the students benefited from learning about climate change, because back then, I think the knowledge was even less so than it is now, and now the awareness we have of climate change, unfortunately, is for all the wrong reasons because of all the disasters. So we need to have people who are aware, educated, understand climate change, the science as best as possible, someone who's not a scientist, but how that feeds into law and policy. Now coming back to Singapore, at the Center for International Law, we have established a climate change focus area that is led by Danielle Yao, and I believe she will also be speaking. An important part of the work at the Center for International Law, in addition to research and scholarship, is capacity building. And we do many specialized courses on different topics of international law. And during this time period, we have also developed a number of capacity building courses for climate change, for example, focusing on the ocean climate nexus. And this is an area which only recently is gaining more attention, especially within the UNFCCC system. And I know in Sharm el-Sheikh, there will be the ocean dialogues. So I'm pleased to say that because we have a very strong oceans law and policy program here, we developed specialized courses on climate change and the law of the sea. These are training courses that are provided to government agencies, of course, those scholars who are interested, practitioners, and they go into the different topics from protection of the marine environment to maritime boundary issues, adaptation, mitigation, all of these that are very critical also for the ocean. Now, also, it's been a real pleasure to be collaborating as well with Professor Minarov and with Durham University. Indeed, last year, we had what I think was a very successful series of webinars. These were a series of 10 monthly webinars entitled The Road to COP26, preparatory lecture series. And of course, that was the COP last year in Glasgow. And we also collaborated with the World Commission on Environmental Law of the IUCN. And there was a purpose behind this series. We invited top experts in international climate change law, and we're also careful to always have a balance between North, South, and gender balance. And they were invited to lecture and provide expert overview and insights into some of the key issues that were going to be discussed in Glasgow, and also looking at what had happened in past COP, the decisions, and of course, within the framework of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement legal framework. And it was really aimed at educating people, getting prepared for the COP, because the COP had a specific purpose. So it was not simply about just giving an overall introduction to climate change law. It had a specific purpose. And we really aimed at government officials, academics, NGOs who play a very important part in these processes, and also others who are going to be attending or interested in the climate change meetings. So that was, we did 10 in total, and I understand that they continue to be viewed and looked at, and I think that is a very good sign that to succeed in promoting knowledge, and I think this is really the key that we're looking at. So we are continuing at the Center for International Law to collaborate with the Durham Center for Sustainable Development Law and Policy. Danielle Yao will also be speaking more about other capacity building and coursework that we're doing. But I just wanted to give a brief overview and again underscore how important it is to promote education of climate change at all levels. But from my perspective, climate change law, it should be in all law school curriculum, frankly. So thank you very much. And for those who are at the COP, I wish you a very productive, and I hope we have a very good outcome from this COP.
Thank you. And now we will hear from Danielle, I believe. She's online.
Yes, I am.
Perfect, thank you. Hello, Danielle, can you hear us?
Hello. Yes, very well. And hello to everybody in Sharm el-Sheikh.
Wonderful to see you. So looking forward
Lovely
to
to see
hearing from you more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petra. Thank you. Good day, and thank you to Petra and the team at Durham University Center for Sustainable Development, Law and Policy for this important initiative in convening this panel to discuss collaboration research and education. The CIL, Center for International Law, is delighted to be partnering and supporting this initiative at the Education Hub in COP27. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak. Dr. Oral has just referred to the overarching cross-cutting nature of climate change and the importance of promoting climate change education at law levels and to be included in all core modules. My remarks will just focus on the who, the what, and the why of collaboration. So let's start with the who. Our perspective, and also a little bit of my personal perspective as well, is really the importance of a multi-stakeholder approach. I think this is absolutely critical in an area like climate change or sustainability, if I take it under a much broader umbrella. Nobody has a monopoly of knowledge, not least lawyers, and operating on a solo basis, on a silo basis, there are risks that this can generate a degree of risk in terms of the gap or misalignment, and which are not actually sufficiently responsive or adequately addresses the current global challenges. Lawyers should not operate in a vacuum, and it's thus vitally important that we as lawyers tap and collaborate on the expertise and network of a whole range of stakeholders. There are certainly benefits to this broad, diverse and inclusive range of partnerships, and of course it can be, from our experience, different depending on the particular topic, the nature of the project, and the objective. So let me share on some of these stakeholders. We have collaborated at CIL with other academic research institutions, whether on an individual basis or on an institutional to institutional level. I'm very pleased to share that the Center for International Law and the Durham's Center for Sustainable Law and Development and recently signed, in fact, just in early November, a Memorandum of Understanding for academic cooperation. And this is a great example formalizing what has already been a fantastic informal collaboration on initiatives of mutual interest. And this allows our institutions to leverage on our respective perspective. And here we have a really global perspective, an Asian perspective and a European perspective, which is important in combining our expertise, leverages on our mutual strengths, and really expands on a network and platform for both of us to reach a much greater impact and a wider audience than what each of us institutions can achieve alone. From experience, there's also a rich vein to be tapped from within the same institution, much as what the earlier speakers have already mentioned. Within the National University of Singapore, for instance, there is system-level research on climate change and sustainability across different departments, on climate systems, on water systems, on biological systems, social systems, as well as climate mitigation, such as the Center for Climate-Based Solutions, Tropical Marine Science Institute, the Site Energy Studies Institute. And we have found it very valuable to collaborate with these institutions within the NUS itself. And on this point, I could also share on a very interesting module that's offered by the NUS Center, by the National University of Singapore. There is a Masters of Science program in Environmental Management, a really innovative cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary master's program that combines core modules in law, in business, public policy, and in science. So I teach the environmental law module, and it's really intended for really mid-career sort of candidates who are interested in moving into the environmental sustainability field. And climate change is, of course, one of the key topics that I teach in this course. And this really just goes to the importance of this cross-cutting perspective on issues of this nature. We are also working very closely with climate scientists from NUS to ensure that the legal analysis that we provide are actually well-grounded in science. Overall objective remains the same. We want to provide legal rigor in the academic research and teaching to form a basis for robust policy making. Having said that, I'll be the first to acknowledge there's definitely room for closer and more collaboration. There's certainly scope to develop more ties. We're in the beginning of this process, or midway point of this process, and there's a lot of scope, we feel, to collaborate with other academic partners in Singapore or within the wider region. The second group of stakeholders which are key collaborators are the public sectors. Now, Dr. Ora has mentioned that key thrust of our mandate at CIL is capacity building, and the target audience are principally the government officials, negotiators. And for that reason, it is quite important, especially when governments around the world are really the institutions that decide on the policy, that negotiate the framework and rules. It is very important that our capacity building, our programs, our research really ties in and has this collaborative links in providing the rigor and analysis, and also, quite importantly, providing an opportunity for innovative cross-idea research, test bidding and ideas, which are important foundations for robust and science-based policy decision. It is a two-way street because our capacity building and research also needs to be sensitive and responsive to the pulse of geopolitics, the pulse of government policy, and really continually refined to be fit for purpose and responsive to real needs. And in appropriate situations, offering perspectives, fresh perspectives to the policymakers. So there are various models available, whether it's closed-door dialogues, capacity buildings, inclusion in government delegations, as some colleagues are, and also in track 1.52 type of conversations. Dr. Moawal has also mentioned the MFA program that we work with on capacity building. And on that front, we also worked with the Swiss Embassy last year after COP26 in Glasgow for an assessment and evaluation of the discussions by several chief climate negotiators. Another group of stakeholders we work with would be international organizations, including regional organizations. And I'm delighted to say that we have partnered with the UNFCCC Secretariat on 2 climate-related workshops this year, and one of which includes our good friends and partners at Durham on one of these workshops. And I will certainly speak more to that later in my remarks. And really the value here in collaborating with international organizations are that the fact that they are really important keynotes in this process. They offer significant resources, network, institutional knowledge beyond that of our own institutions. Regional perspectives would also be quite important, and we are currently considering how we can collaborate with regional organizations for implementing the Sustainable Development Strategy for the Seas of East Asia. And last but not least, civil society, businesses, and industry. They form other very important key stakeholder groups. It is undeniable that the role of corporates and business in the global fight against climate change. Here in COP27, as it has been in the past few COPs, a highly visible presence of business and industries. We have seen a number of corporate net zero pledges. We have seen the role of financial institutions in green finance, the industry's role in enabling green technologies and the carbon credit markets. In the CIL Climate Conversation series, I host a conversation series where we have invited experts from across the range of industries and academia for fireside chats, precisely for this reason. So for instance, recently we had our fireside chats included guests such as Ruth Herbert, who's the CEO of the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. We've also had conversations with Sean Kidney, who's the CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative under this conversation series. These are all available on the CIL website for those who are interested in viewing such fireside chats. So I would include within this category legal practitioners and corporate counsels, because they have a key role in advising clients on the corporate responsibilities and the commitments in the global fight against climate change, and in aligning the business strategies, processes, and operations to be aligned with the Paris Agreement goals. In short, integrating climate sustainability perspective into other areas of legal practice. And so one of our partners in this regard is the International Law Association Singapore branch, who we collaborate with quite frequently in running events. Recently, we had a dialogue on climate litigation with the ILA, featuring Professor Dan Bodansky, Marsman, as well as an official from the Singapore Attorney General's Chambers. And I recently conducted a training session convened by the Singapore Law Society, where I spoke on the issue of free trade agreements and sustainability, and educating lawyers on the importance of reflecting this balance and this cohesiveness and perspective on climate and sustainability issues in trade and investment frameworks. And certainly civil society as well. We do engage with them for their very unique perspectives and advocacy for the various perspectives of the various constituencies that they represent. very key to just transition in this regard. And CRL has been participating in negotiations, or rather in discussions, not negotiations, but discussions, convened by the Independent Global Stocktake Consortium in Southeast Asia, which follows the development of the formal global stocktake. So that's the who. What about the what and the how? So my preceding remarks also hint to the what. Across the relevant disciplines, whether they can be different topics within the climate change law and policy arena, different areas of practice of international law or domestic law, as well as disciplines, whether it's science, policy, or businesses. Right? So I mentioned earlier the 2 workshops. So in April 2022, this year, CRL collaborated with the UNFCCC Secretariat on the Climate Change Law and Policy Capacity Building Workshop, entitled What Did COP26 Mean for the Asia-Pacific Region and What to Expect Next? This features a range of expert speakers, including from the UNFCCC Secretariat, current former negotiators, academia, as well as civil society. The participants will comprise primarily of government officials from the Asia-Pacific region, and it was designed to prepare officials for the COP27 negotiations. So very purposeful capacity building framework, capacity building program, not a general introduction to climate change as such. This is not a program we could have provided the trainers wholly in-house, given the range of topics covered. And so we're very grateful for the collaboration with the UNFCCC. With Durham and the UNFCCC, we have just recently concluded in October a 2-part workshop series in the path towards preparing for the global stocktake in 2023. And again, we had a range of speakers, including Petra herself as well. And part 1 of this workshop focused on oceans, climate change, and the global stocktake. And so the speakers talked about both the science. We had speakers from there, civil society, talking about unpacking the global stocktake for ocean climate action. We had a UNFCCC Secretariat representative, Dr. Joanna Post, speaking to the process of the development of the ocean climate change agenda at the UNFCCC as well as a representative from the Pacific Island Forums, sharing on the perspective of the Pacific Island Forum states on this very, very important issue. Personally, I found it a very invaluable exercise in bringing together different strands and provides an excellent perspective and foundation for our future work. Part 2 was a global stocktake as a process, and that was led by Durham University, looking at the inputs, outputs, and ambition. And again, it was a very, very useful exercise. And what is the path going forward for us from this series of workshops? We plan to convene a 2-part conference series next year on the global stocktake, one in March and another in second quarter. And we certainly welcome participants here to look out for that, and do reach out to us if you'd like to collaborate or participate in this conference series. We also plan to submit joint submissions to the GST portal that further synthesize and develop the ideas raised here. And then lastly, let's look at the why. Why are we looking at this? And I think my remarks earlier has already pointed to some of these benefits. Fundamentally, academic research and education should be pragmatic and practical. It should be cognizant of and responsive not just to government policies and geopolitics, but also to private sector challenges and conditions, essentially real-world issues. And this requires an interdisciplinary approach, quite naturally. The benefits are obvious. They are essential in filling gaps. They allow us to enhance each other's strengths, to mutually support our respective strengths, optimizes positive collaboration, and really also avoid some negative competition and duplication of work. Sustainability also, isn't it? If you look at it, we're sharing our expertise, pooling our resources, and the involvement of different stakeholders is quite important in providing the necessary credibility, legitimacy, and take up on whatever programs that are rolled out, because it has accommodated, it has responded to these different perspectives. It is of course not all cozy and optimistic. I mean, there are challenges in collaborating across time zones, collaborating across different regions. We're going to make sure there's sufficient representation and diversity. And each institution has its own challenges in terms of red tape that also needs to be navigated. We also, as research institutions, also need to be mindful to avoid fragmentation and politicizing and having the agenda being hijacked by other interests. And so these are some of the challenges we're mindful of. But I believe that with the attitude and with the right perspective, we're able to overcome this and to enhance this area of collaboration. So what next? Finally, a final remark. What next are we looking at CIL? We're looking to establish an ASEAN network of academic and research institutes to develop and strengthen ASEAN collaboration on climate change, providing this important regional outlook. Certainly, please look up to us. Please do reach out to us. We're very interested in working with different partners. So thank you, and I look forward to further discussions.
Thank you. Daniel, thank you very much, and please stay online. We will hear now from our next speaker, Professor Ashraf Osman, who should now, yeah, here. So now these are your slides, so I hand over to you. Floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. In Durham University, we do a lot of research which aim to provide scientific input for developing the policy documents and regulations regarding the impact of climate change on various infrastructures. And today I will talk about a couple of examples of the research we are doing and a couple of the collaborations, collaborative research in various parts of the world. The first example of research I would like to talk about is our work on developing or understanding the impact of hydrometeorological factors on landslides, how rainfall and how climate change could affect the frequency and the extent of landslides. And in this work, we aim to provide guidelines and policy document in collaboration with the Department of Public Work in Malaysia and the National Disaster Management Agency, NADAMA, which is part of the Prime Minister Office in Malaysia. And we collaborate also with the National University of Malaysia. So the aim of this research is try to understand the relationship between rainfall and the change of rainfall and the change of climate change on landslides, and also to produce some sort of susceptibility mapping for areas which are prone to landslides in Malaysia. Particularly, we are focusing on one of the regions is Lagant. Lagant region, which is Lagant River Basin, which is like the economic hub of Malaysia, where the federal capital, Putrajaya, is located. And we're also looking at the social vulnerability in back identifying people who will be affected most by landslides. And to do this research, we selected the slopes in urban areas, critical slopes, as you can see here in area near Kuala Lumpur in Kajang area. And so failures of this landslides could have serious damage to the infrastructures and to the community around it. And what we did, we instrumented these slopes with state-of-art sensors just to monitor rainfall, to monitor the change in the movement of the soil, the change of water in the soil, and try to understand how rainfall could affect the stabilities of the slope and how landslide can induce how rainfall can induce landslides. Because our from this research, it's not just the rainfall who cause landslides, but it's rather the change in the pressure or water pressure inside the soil that can cause that resulting from rainfall infiltration that can cause the landslides. So, and then we developed numerical model to scale up our finding to the wider region, and we came with a landslide suspectability map to identify areas which are prone to landslide in this region. And not only that, but we are doing that because actually in order to, because landslide can have a devastating impact on the communities, loss in life and loss in properties. So we work with our colleague in social science to try to identify vulnerable people, which is very important in pre and post-disaster intervention and management, and also to help the Malaysia Disaster Management Agency in channeling and giving priority of their hazard funding. And our colleague came with different factors which affected which are more critical in identifying vulnerable people. These factors: age, ethnicity, education, disability, and health. Anyway, there is a couple of publications around this work, and we can have, those who are interested can look at different resources, and we can have a discussion afterward. So following the success of this project, we got, as part of COP26 adaptation and resilience, funding by the UK Research and Innovation, UKRI, the main funding body in the UK. We got additional fund to extend this work to the wider region in the Southeast Asia. So we established a network from 11 universities in 7 countries, and we include in this network several stakeholders like the Indonesian Ministry of Housing, and the Department of Public Work in Malaysia, the Construction and Industry Board in Malaysia, which is responsible for regulations and for policies regarding the impact or regarding critical infrastructures. So we work with all these stakeholders and policymakers in order to first of all, to have a hazard map for landslides, and also to produce some sort of guidelines and policy document in this region. So, and part of our work actually in this project, we looked specifically for some of the regulations by CIDB, by the Construction and Industry Development Board in Malaysia. And we look at, we review the current practice and the current policy documents. And we are working on now in we are working together in issuing like a new version of this policy document. They call it the Manual for Critical Infrastructures. And another objective of this project is to establish like a think tank, a network of scientists, researchers, social scientists, policymakers, who will look at focusing on into integrating landslide hazard into national planning and taking into account climate change and different aspects. The last projects the last examples is our work on developing like novel or a framework for risk assessment for cultural heritage in Turkey. And in this project, we work with EFAD, which is the Turkish National Disaster Agency, and the Istanbul Metropolitan, with Istanbul Municipality, and with different universities in Turkey. And the main objective of this project is to try to produce landslide and flash flooding, or to assess the impact of landslides on monument site in Istanbul historical area. and also to try to understand the impact of climate change on these sites, and also to advise the government and policymakers on how to modify or how to produce guidelines and policy documents which can protect these sites. And also we propose different recommendations for how to reconstruct historical site which is affected by landslides. And it happened a lot in the recent years in Istanbul. Several historical sites had been damaged. So we, in this project, part of its objective actually is to try to put recommendations of best way of reconstructing the damaged infrastructures. So these three examples show a wide range of projects which involve close collaborations with policymakers, trying to transform our scientific finding or engineering research into documents and into a policy document and into guidelines. The last thing I would like to talk about is we have a plan at, in Durham actually to establish a doctoral training center on resilient infrastructure, and this center actually aimed to enhance the strong interdisciplinary research in sustainable infrastructures and the impact of climate change, and also the effect of try to understand or the social response to climate impact on infrastructures, and also to enhance the debate on current practice and current policies and their suitability for climate change or for changing climate. And this program is highly interdisciplinary research where we plan to work with colleagues from different disciplines and different backgrounds. And the plan is to have like a 4-year PhD studies. So in the first year, we focus on basic skills to do on like climate modeling or different aspects and different necessary skills for our students. And then the second year and the third year, it's more like to give our students opportunities to have placement either with industry or international placement in one of the institutes we are collaborating with in different parts of the world. And in the third year, we encourage our students to try to develop and participate in or organize PhD conferences. And in the last year of their studies, the fourth year, they focus on the dissemination aspect and presenting their work at different international conferences. And throughout this 4-year program, we have transferable skills and a lot of training skills which they need throughout their PhD. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. This is very brave of you. There we go. I'm Emil Sokolovsky. I'm the Global Director for Climate Change with CDP, and I'm going to do something slightly unusual because it's Monday afternoon of the second week of COP, and I think people are slightly exhausted by this process, and I'm not shocked. Forgive me for doing something. I promise I'm not going to embarrass anyone, but if you'd all not mind coming slightly forward to the front seats, I promise I won't ask anything that will terrify you. That includes you, the photographer, that includes everyone, because I'm going to ask questions that are not. I'm not a professor. I'm a recovering lawyer, and I'm a failed academic. I think we could call it that. And what I'm worried about in this meeting and in many others, in addition to what I think we're all worried about, is the fact that there are no bridges between the worlds that we're talking. There were 2 educators speaking today, and there were 2 scientists speaking today. And and Petra, of course, 3 educators, but I wait for your remarks at the end. I will go on to my slide deck, but before I do, I'm going to ask a question that's important. It's okay not to know this, because my assumption is that you don't, but who here knows, including the panel, what CDP is? That's fair. Sad for me, but very, very fair. I'm also going to try and figure out the clicker. Whoa, there we go. I'll let you read this, and I'm going to explain it in a second, but the reason that I'm worried, and the reason that we show this, and the reason that there are questions of what CDP does, is we've heard about civil society, and we've heard about analysis of data, and we've heard about things that terrify me in terms of sea level rise, and I've heard about landslides in urban areas. And the shakers and the movers of those here are the countries, but they're very, very rarely the ones that get the work done. So essentially, I'm here to beg you to use the data that CDP exposes to the world. What do we do? I promise I'll try and keep it interesting, but I was in a conversation a few days ago. Biden announced that all procurement for the White House, $63 billion a year, has to report to CDP and go in accordance with SBTI. And I was in a conversation later saying that when I was a teenager, I would be disappointed in myself for actually being excited by that, because it's the dullest thing in the world. But where we get our food, where our government purchases anything, where any corporate does anything at all, is where climate action can potentially happen. CDP is an NGO. We run the oldest and largest by far disclosure system to enable companies, cities, states, and regions to disclose about their climate activities, as well as on a different questionnaire as their activities around forest and land and water security. And when I say disclose, I don't mean a tick box. I mean 120 pages that require a crew of 50 people a month to create the data. 18,700 companies reported to us this year. That is more than 55% of the global market capitalization. That means that you have 120 pages around what most large corporates in the world are doing. We have essentially, how do we get to this, and why is that important to what was presented here, and why am I worried about the disconnect? Yes, I figured it out, which is delightful. We're an NGO. How do you get Google to fill 120 pages for you and make it mostly public, or at least available to the public? You go to investors and you tell them this is relevant, and we did that in 2000, and you tell them to ask their companies. You go to clients, the biggest clients, whether it's BMW or anyone else, and you say to them, ask your whole supply chain to report to us. And then you can assess them on that. And the end result in that is always, always an improvement of action. I don't like to think of what I call the devils and the angels. The 20% of leading companies are those that we're going to get anyway. They're trying really hard. And the 20% of devils that are laggards for whatever reason, let's solve what we can before instead of focusing on the hard. So the 60% in the middle are lost, usually. And our questionnaire is supposed to be more of a teaching tool, of a journey. There is a score at the end, and the score is important to investors and to companies, and they show off, and we have an A-list, and that is incredibly important. But filling it out is an important element in and of itself. So, we have that, we have that, and we have that. I can go into many more details, and I can throw numbers at you, but my internal medieval historian is against numbers. So here's the story of what it looks like. I'm going to take you back to when I was 13 and I loved chocolate cake, which I still do. And I sat at my grandmother and she looked at me and she said, "Are you sure you want to eat chocolate cake?" There was no aggression, there were no facts. It was just a question that makes you think. Not a judgment. Well, it was. That is how we work. 120 pages of questions are a journey to be walked, whether it's for 1,100 cities, states, and regions, whether it's for 18,700 companies, whether it's for 555 financial institutions, and I could go on. That is making them think. It is also providing data for us. It is also providing data for civil society to make use of. Some of the data can be aggregated. Some of it is open. Most of it, however, is the work that we do year on year to try and ask the right questions. Now, my next slides are all about the global stocktake, and I will try and get to them in a second, but I think there is a basic element missing here. When we ask questions, we incentivize certain answers. What is the best framework that you use? Craft, by the way, is an interesting framework because it's used for an adaptation taxonomy somewhere else. So we ask, what science have you consulted in your choices? We can't judge what you're doing with it, but we can ask what science is best. And that's where our partnerships come forward. What should we do? I'm not an academic. And even if I were, no one covers every field. What should we do? What should we push for and what should we not push for? What should we do in a local level and what level of stakeholder engagement? What management do you want to see and who do you want to talk to? And the global stocktake. Why? I'm going to show an answer in a second, but the real why is COP26, even though we've existed since 2000. COP26 had two analyses of what degrees we stand at. The world is aimed towards. Is it 2.4? Is it 2.7? Is it 3.2 or is it 1.6? The problem is that we don't know exactly in a harmonized way how the private sector's actions and finance fit into the global stocktake. And it's easier to analyze one source and incredibly confusing to stocktake is this. As the name says, as it's written on the tin, it's supposed to tell us what's happening in the world and how panicked we should be, or relaxed, depends on how you look at it. It has to be purpose-driven, it has to be inclusive, and yes, inclusive is just transition, but it is also non-state actors. And it has to be evidence-focused, and by evidence-focused, I mean it has to be harmonized. That's why non-state actors should be included, for accuracy, to raise their ambition, to raise everyone's, and to reduce emissions. But what I've found, because before this I was a negotiator, is that it is possible for a state, for a party to walk into a negotiating room and to have a position, and to walk out and to be communicated from the biggest companies within that country that say, actually, we can do this. Actually, that's easy for us. And a negotiator can come in and say, there's an easy win. There's an interaction between non-state actors and state actors. And we cannot ignore one of the biggest levers that exist. How should they do that? I have a paper that was written by myself and a colleague. You can or you cannot take it. I'm very happy to give you a copy, but there are two ways, and again, this relates to collaboration and education. First, and importantly, report directly to the global stocktake. The problem with that is that the global stocktake is filled by national technical committees that work and only coordinate toward the end. So a different company will say different things in different countries. Let's assume out of an innocent misunderstanding or lack of harmonization. And the second is through the nationally determined contribution process with the biannual transparency reports, following the enhanced transparency framework and so on. And there are places where they can do that. But again, the knowledge is missing. How do we go out and tell a company in sector A how to report within that? How do we convince a country to take that into account? The processes are nationally driven. So I return to begging you to use our information to drive where needed. This is the direct pathway. The direct pathway is, as it says, submissions to the global stocktake. We carry out capacity building. In Brazil, you'll see later, we carried out capacity building for the government in Italy. We engage all of our stakeholders, and that is many, to try and engage and disclose. But nobody knows exactly how. Nobody in this building that carries God knows how many thousands of experts that have been working on climate can give you the finalized, harmonized version. How do I take into account what Osman said? How do I take into account what Chris said? How do I use the educational system that Daniela and Nilüfer presented? We communicate the global stocktake process to Brazilian stakeholders, by which we mean to say to them, this is how you should do it together. This is how we can find out what the inventory of Brazil is. This is how we define what additionality is. This is how we can decide what a carbon credit is, with a global report. Then we go through the biannual transparency reports. I know I've taken up a lot of time at the beginning of this, and I would love for us to have a little bit of time, if anyone has any questions, to discuss. There are ambition loops. I'm going to go through this very fast. I think we understand how they work. An ambition loop for all of us works by acknowledging what is possible. And what is possible is not yet known on a national level for companies. It is in academia. But what is possible isn't communicated between academia and companies other than by us. So again, we beg you, please use our information, and please go to universities and talk to them. And we would love to ask you the questions that we ask year on year. We have worked with the Italian government to create a methodology to collect data from non-state actors. We encourage you to proceed in that, and when you develop and you go beyond to emerging markets and developing countries, the need for education and partnership, especially in the private sector, grows even more. These are the results of some of the research. Again, I don't need to tell you all of the numbers. I know that you can read. I'm going to end on 2 points. There are 3 pathways in the Enhanced Transparency Framework. I think there are 4, but there are 3 pathways that we recognized by which a corporate or a non-state actor can be included in the global stocktake. But they stand empty because no one has said how to fill them in. The more that fill them in, the more that becomes habit. The more that becomes habit, the more it impacts negotiations. The more it impacts negotiations, the more it becomes law. That's the first. And the second is to engage. CDP is one of our bridges to non-state actors. This is my first year in side events and my 14th year as a negotiator. I have never seen a bigger gap between 2 neighboring buildings. I've never seen a bigger gap in the language that we use between academia and corporates, and I beg that we collaborate on that in the questions that we ask. So I'd be happy to answer any of the questions or provide any of the things. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much to all of the speakers. I think there were very different perspectives, very insightful, and Amir, just to add to your concerns, I'm also very worried. I'm worried about what's happening here, what's happening down there, where the negotiations are actually taking place, and how do we intersect not just science and law, and it's time that we do perceive climate change as a legal challenge as well, but how do we interact between these different stakeholders? How do we actually build these bridges? Now, I will try over the next 7 minutes or so, and not to disappoint anyone here, we will have lunch after that and some time for questions and maybe some networking as well. I just would like to try during the next 5 to 7 minutes to bring these pieces maybe together and to share some thoughts about how we can maybe bridge these gaps that we have identified. So again, I come back to our easy objectives that were the objectives of this session, and that include extending, sharing, exploring, and involving at all levels, not just in our research and our impact-related work, but also in our climate education. Now, we've heard of some of these examples already, the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed with CIL, the workshop series that we have, the lecture series that we have. This is all nice and good, but is it more than just noise? How does it make a difference in the real world? And that is what we should be really worried about, and this is why we should work together. So now one way of working together to make a real change is using the mechanisms that the Paris Agreement enshrines to make a difference. And we've already heard from one of these main paths. One is across the nationally determined contributions, and the other one is the global stocktake. Now, in an ideal world, the global stocktake would bring us in 2050 to net zero emissions. Again, there's a debate. There's a debate whether that is just CO2 emissions, is it all greenhouse gas emissions? And scientists know best. I'm not going to answer this. I know what the Paris Agreement says, and you can read that up. I know that, and you know that the UNFCCC already states in its objectives that we need to balance emissions in the atmosphere in a timely manner. And the Paris Agreement for the first time has given us a concrete temperature target, a concrete goal, a limitation that is seen by all parties as the one that we need to aim for if we want to avoid the worst disasters for those who are already vulnerable and who haven't benefited as much. Now, this global stocktake every 5 years goes hand in hand with a new submission of NDCs. Some call these an ambition cycle, which could actually mean that we always end there where we have started. So let's call it a ratcheting up mechanism where we get better every time and ideally reach these scenarios. And of course, we have done these workshops with the UNFCCC, and I'm most grateful that we have support from the Secretariat and that we have worked in this partnership. And we are aiming for a conference where we have more industry partners, stakeholders involved next year. But again, how are we going to make sure that this will make a difference in the end? Now, parties are not only expected to submit nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, they are also required, although maybe the language is a little bit softer in that respect, under Article 4, paragraph 19, to submit long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies. I will spare you the abbreviation for that. Now, as you can see, there are some who have submitted these long-term low greenhouse gas emission strategies. And for those who have done so, it pays off because they're aligning far more closely to the least cost scenarios that we would ideally like to see for the entire world, for everyone. So far, we've had 56 submissions of these strategies, and the synthesis report of the Secretariat for these first strategies spells out that there are a number of synergies that arise for those countries who have submitted them. And this is in terms of how they implement other SDGs, but also in terms of how they can ensure that an orderly transition happens in their economies. So I think what we need to focus on is how do we build the capacity in some countries to submit these long-term strategies based on the assumption that we think that they, of course, all want to adhere to what they have agreed to in the Paris Agreement and that they do apply the international law principle of good faith in applying the Paris Agreement. Now, this is a really important principle. The International Court of Justice has based a whole set of states' obligations on the principle of good faith, and it should be applied in the context of treaty interpretation. So what we are doing, what we are trying to achieve with these partnerships is, of course, to support those who are making the law, who are making the decisions, and who can opt for change at scale. And we've heard from some of the speakers here raising the concerns of the disconnect. But I think we need to have a step-by-step approach. We have to start with what we can deliver as academia, and we need to be guided by other partners. We can't do this on our own. We need to collaborate with other academic institutions, but also going beyond academia. And in applying these principles, I believe that we can act in a different way and that there can be intergenerational preparedness, because quite frankly, I think this is something that should worry all of us. We are not preparing the next generation for a world in which they will have to live with climate change. And we are not preparing them for a world that will see more loss and damage and more disaster increasingly and more severely happening. And if we do this, if we can achieve a balancing of the greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, I believe then we are also on track of achieving all the other sustainable development goals. Now, I'm more than happy, as I'm sure all the panelists will be, to answer any questions that you will have. And I very much hope that we have some time now over lunch to network, to get to know you here in the audience. I'm really grateful that you have stayed with us and really enjoyed this session. I hope we can make a meaningful contribution. So instead of providing a brochure, we have created a QR code that you can scan, and you can find some more information. But please don't take this as just an advertisement feature of the university, because I think what we really want to do is to make a change. So we want to work with you, we want to hear from you. Please do get in touch and let us try and find ways through which we can work together. Thank you very much.